The gun was already on the table before anyone said a word. Meredith Holloway noticed it the moment she stepped through the service entrance, her cart rattling against the marble threshold, a bottle of cleaning solution tipping sideways and nearly rolling off. She caught it with one hand without thinking. Then she looked up, and her stomach dropped. The conference room on the 42nd floor of Callaway and Voss Financial was not supposed to be occupied on a Thursday night. That was the whole reason she had been assigned to clean it after 7. No suits, no phones ringing, no one looking through her like she was part of the furniture. Just Meredith, her mop, and 2 hours of quiet. Instead, there were 14 men seated around the longest table she had ever been close enough to touch. She should have turned around. She knew it the second, her eyes adjusted to the low light, and she registered the energy in the room, coiled, dangerous, the kind of quiet that happens right before something breaks. But the door to the service corridor had already swung shut behind her, and the latch mechanism had a habit of locking from the outside. She had mentioned it to maintenance 3 times. They had never fixed it, so she did what she always did when there was no good option available. She kept her head down and pretended she was invisible. It had been working for 26 years. There was no reason it should stop now. She pushed the cart toward the far corner of the room, moving slowly, staying close to the windows. Outside, the Chicago skyline blinked and hummed. Down below, 42 floors of distance between her and the sidewalk, she focused on the glass, on the lights, on anything except the 14 men who had, without a single one of them saying a word, collectively stopped what they were doing and turned to look at her. One of them spoke first. He was sitting at the near end of the table, medium height from what she could tell, with the kind of posture that came from decades of being obeyed. His hair was silver at the temples. His suit was charcoal and flawless. His face, when she finally let herself glance at it, was expressionless in the specific way that meant he had spent years training it to be. Who let the cleaning crew in? It was not a question. It was an indictment. A younger man near the door, one of the ones standing against the wall, not seated, started to stammer something about scheduling and a miscommunication, and he would handle it immediately. The silver-haired man cut him off with one finger lifted from the table. Just one finger. The younger man went silent. The silver-haired man looked at Meredith. She looked back. She didn't mean to. It was instinct, the same way you look at the source of a sound before you can stop yourself. His name was Desmond Hale. She knew this because his photograph had been on the front page of the Tribune 4 months ago, above a headline about the Alderton acquisition and what it meant for the city's pension fund. She had read the article twice in the break room at her day job. She worked mornings at the public library on Michigan Avenue, resolving books and helping patrons with the printer, and she remembered thinking that he had the eyes of someone who considered other people to be problems that hadn't been solved yet. She was thinking it again now. "Leave the cart," he said, "and sit down." Meredith opened her mouth. No sound came out. I said sit. She sat. The nearest chair was a rolling leather one with armrests, the kind that probably cost more than her monthly rent. She sat on the edge of it with her hands folded in her lap and her cleaning apron still tied around her waist, and tried to remember how to breathe at a normal rate. Across the table from her, one of the other men, older, with a thick accent she placed immediately as Czechoslovakian, specifically the Eastern dialect spoken in the Moravia region, leaned toward the man beside him and said, quietly and in Czech, that the interruption was a bad omen and perhaps they should postpone. The man beside him answered in the same language. He said they had already postponed twice. He said Hale was running out of patience. He said they needed to get the terms settled tonight, or the whole arrangement would collapse, and they would lose everything they had already put in. Meredith listened to all of this and stared at her hands. Desmond Hale was watching her the way you watch a problem you haven't categorized yet. "You understand you are not to leave this room," he said. She nodded. "And you understand that what happens in this room does not leave this room." She nodded again. He held her gaze for another 3 seconds. Then he turned back to the table. Where were we? The meeting had been going on for what Meredith estimated was at least an hour before she arrived, based on the number of empty water glasses and the general atmosphere of restrained frustration that had settled over the room like weather. There were three distinct groups. Hale and his people, 4 men who she gradually understood, were representing a European banking consortium headquartered in Vienna, and 2 men who had arrived separately and sat slightly apart from both groups and hadn't said much. She filed them away under unknown variable and kept watching. The problem, as far as she could tell from listening while pretending not to listen, was translation. Hale had brought 2 interpreters. The one handling German was competent enough. She caught him making a few minor errors in formality register, using informal verb constructions when the situation called for formal ones, which was subtly insulting in ways that the Austrian bankers clearly noticed even if they were too polished to say so directly. The one handling what Meredith initially thought was standard French turned out to be handling Swiss French, which was different in specific ways that mattered, and he was clearly struggling with it. But the real problem was the 2 men sitting apart. They had spoken perhaps 6 words since she arrived, all of them in a language that neither interpreter had attempted to touch. The German interpreter had actually glanced at them twice with a look of barely concealed alarm. The French interpreter was pretending they didn't exist. Meredith recognized the language in the first 30 seconds. It was a specific dialect of Romanian, with loanwords from Hungarian and a phonological pattern that had developed in the Transylvania region during the 18th century, and had mostly died out except in isolated communities in the mountains and in certain diaspora populations in the industrial Midwest of the United States. She had spent 8 months living in one of those communities when she was 19, cataloging oral histories for a linguistics professor at Northwestern, who had paid her a very modest stipend and given her full academic credit, and changed the direction of her entire intellectual life. She knew the dialect well enough to know that the 2 men were talking about the meeting, and she knew it well enough to understand what they were saying, and what they were saying was not good. The one closer to the wall, heavyset with a beard that he kept touching at the corner, said to the other one that the Austrian offer was 14% less than what had been represented to them, that they had been brought here under false terms, that the man at the head of the table, meaning Desmond Hale, had made promises to their employer that he clearly intended to walk back, and that their employer would want to know. The other one, younger, said, "What do we do with that?" The bearded one said, "We listen, we remember, we go home and we tell him everything." Meredith looked at the table. She looked at Desmond Hale, who was in the middle of a tense back and forth with the lead Austrian banker about guarantee structures and collateral timelines, and did not appear to be paying attention to the 2 men in the corner. She looked at the door, which was still locked. She thought about something her mother had said to her once, when she was 12 years old, and had just been told by a teacher that she was good at languages, but that there wasn't much of a future in it. Her mother had said, "A tool is only useless to someone who doesn't know what it can do." Then Meredith did the thing that she would spend the next 2 years describing to people as either the bravest or the most idiotic decision of her life, depending on the day. She cleared her throat. The sound was small, embarrassingly small, a mouse-sized sound in a lion's room. But Desmond Hale heard it. He turned. She met his eyes and said, in a voice that was steadier than she had any right to expect, "Mr. Hale, your interpreter doesn't speak that dialect." The room went still in the way that rooms go still when something unexpected happens to the pressure. Hale looked at her. His expression didn't change. Nothing about him changed except his eyes, which sharpened in a way that reminded her of a camera lens adjusting focus. "Excuse me," he said. "The 2 men on your left," she said. "They've been speaking Transylvanian Romanian. Your interpreters haven't picked it up. I think you need to know what they've been saying." One of the standing men near the wall made a move toward her. Hale raised that finger again and the man stopped. "You speak it," Hale said. It was not a question either. He seemed to have decided that questions were an inefficiency. "Yes," she said. "How well?" "Well enough," she said. Then, because she could see that well enough was not going to satisfy him, "I spent 8 months in Bistritz. I catalogued oral histories in that dialect. I have an advanced degree in applied linguistics from the University of Illinois, and I speak 7 other languages, 4 of them fluently. I clean offices on Thursday nights because the library doesn't pay enough for a 1-bedroom in this city." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than before. It had texture. It had weight. The Austrian banker to Hale's right said something in German, low and sharp, that translated roughly as, "Where did they find her?" "I was already here when you arrived. I was in the corner with my cart. You looked through me." She kept her voice neutral. "It happens." The banker stared at her. The bearded Romanian-speaking man had gone very still. Desmond Hale looked at Meredith Holloway for a long moment, a woman in a cleaning apron with a bottle of spray solution still tucked in her front pocket, sitting in a leather chair that cost more than her car, hands folded in her lap. And something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't entirely name. "Tell me," he said. "Exactly what they said," she told him. She translated the full exchange, both sides, including the part about his promises and the 14% discrepancy and the intention to report back. She kept her voice flat and professional and watched the color around Desmond Hale's jaw tighten exactly once before he got it under control. He asked her to repeat the section about the promises. She did, word for word. He was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to the bearded man and addressed him directly in English. "I understand more of what you've been saying than you thought. That was a test of your discretion. You failed it." He paused. "You'll want to tell your employer that the 14% was never a misrepresentation. It was an adjustment based on the February audit results, which your employer received in writing 6 weeks ago, and apparently chose not to share with you. But it was going to become yours." The bearded man said nothing. His jaw was doing something complicated. The Austrian banker said, very carefully in German, that he would like to revisit one of the earlier terms. Meredith translated without being asked. Then she translated Hale's response. Then the banker's follow-up. She fell into it the way she always fell into translation work. The part of her brain that handled language switching on like a second set of lights coming up, everything becoming simultaneously clearer and faster. She stopped noticing the gun on the table. She stopped noticing that she was in a cleaning apron. She stopped noticing anything except the moving surface of the conversation and the exact right word for each specific thing that needed to be said. 40 minutes later, when the Austrian consortium representative signed his name at the bottom of a document that a woman in a grey blazer produced from a leather portfolio, Meredith was still sitting in the leather chair. Her hands were no longer folded in her lap. She was leaning forward slightly, elbows on the table, the way she always sat when she was fully inside a problem. People began to leave in 1s and 2s. The bearded Romanian man left quickly, without looking at her. The younger one paused at the door and glanced back, and she couldn't read his face. The Austrian banker stopped beside her chair on his way out. He said, in German, that she was extraordinary. She thanked him in German. He smiled, a real one, the first one she had seen from him all night, and then he was gone. The room emptied. The woman in the grey blazer was packing up documents. 2 of the standing men were making phone calls near the window. Meredith sat in the leather chair and looked at her cart in the corner and thought, at some point she was going to have to push it back to the service elevator and finish cleaning the break room on 38 and get home in time to sleep 4 hours before her morning shift. Holloway, she looked up. Desmond Hale was still at the head of the table. He hadn't moved. All the controlled stillness of him was still there, but something around the edges had shifted. He was looking at her differently than he had when she walked in. She couldn't say how exactly. She just knew it was different. "Holloway, yes, you didn't lie. About the languages. I didn't see any advantage in lying." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, more like the physical shape of one without the warmth. Most people in a room like this lie as a reflex. I noticed, she said. This time the sound had something closer to warmth in it. He picked up the gun from the table and slid it inside his jacket with the same casual ease with which someone else might pocket a pen. She watched him do it and felt her heart rate adjust upward and then force itself back down through sheer will. "You're going to get a call tomorrow," he said. "From my office, someone named Whitfield. You'll want to answer it." "I have a job," she said. "You have 2 jobs," he said, "both of which pay you significantly less than you're worth. Whitfield will fix that." "I don't know anything about financial consulting," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm not hiring you to consult on finances." He picked up his briefcase. He straightened his jacket. He was halfway to the door when he stopped without turning around. 7 other languages, he said. "Which ones?" "German, French, Czech, Hungarian, Mandarin, Japanese, Portuguese," she said, "and the Romanian." "That's 8?" I said 7 others besides the Romanian. She said total. He stood in the doorway for a moment. She couldn't see his face. "Whitfield," he said again. Then he left. The call came at 8:47 the next morning, while she was helping a man in his 70s figure out how to log in to his email account at the library's computer terminal. She let it go to voicemail, finished with the patron, got him into his inbox and showed him how to find the photos his granddaughter had sent, refilled her coffee. Then she stepped outside and listened to the message. It was a woman's voice, professional, unhurried, with the slight flatness of someone who made many calls like this one, and had long since stopped finding them notable. She introduced herself as Whitfield and said she was calling on behalf of Desmond Hale and that they would like to discuss a consulting arrangement and that the compensation would be commensurate with her qualifications and she should call back at her convenience. Meredith stood on the front steps of the library with her coffee going cold in her hand and thought about the gun on the table. She thought about the Austrian banker's face when she answered him in his own language. She thought about the bearded man's stillness when he realized she had heard everything. She thought about the moment Desmond Hale had stopped in the doorway. She called back. The arrangement was this: 3 months, project basis, presence required at specific meetings that required multi-language coverage, confidentiality absolute. The compensation was a number that she made Whitfield repeat because she was certain she had misheard it. She had not misheard it. She kept her library job. Hale's people had not asked her to give it up, and she had not offered to. It felt important to keep the thing that had always been there. The quiet and the books and the patrons who called her by her first name, and the broken printer on the 2nd floor that she had learned to coax back to life by removing and reinserting the paper tray 3 times in a specific rhythm. The first meeting she attended in her new capacity was a preliminary negotiation with a media group based in Tokyo. She sat at the right end of the table in a grey blazer she had bought on her lunch break the day before, and translated for 4 hours and afterward felt the particular pleasurable exhaustion that she had only ever felt after doing language work at full intensity. Like every part of her brain had been used, Desmond Hale did not speak to her during the meeting. He addressed the room, addressed the Tokyo representatives, addressed his own team. He was exactly as he had been in the conference room 42 floors above the Chicago skyline. Composed, precise, the kind of man who made you feel that even his silences were intentional. But twice during the 4 hours, she caught him watching her work with an expression she was beginning to understand. Not surprise exactly, more like the look of someone recalibrating. After the Tokyo representatives left, he crossed the room to where she was gathering her notes. "Japanese," he said. "Yes," she said. "You're better in it than our contracted translator was. Your contracted translator used an Osaka dialect in a meeting with people from Kyoto," she said. "That's like using a Boston accent to negotiate in Atlanta. It works, but it's noticeable." He looked at her for a moment. "That specific." "That specific," she agreed. He said nothing else. But when she was leaving, The woman named Whitfield appeared at her elbow and said that Mr. Hale would like to extend the arrangement by another 3 months if she was available. She was available. The thing about Desmond Hale, she came to understand over the following weeks, was that he was not a simple man performing complexity. He was a genuinely complicated person who had spent years building an outer layer of perfect simplicity over the top, the way you would ice a cake to hide the layers. The cake was still there. You just had to know how to look. She started to know how to look. She noticed the way he paused for exactly 1 beat before responding to statements he disagreed with. Not because he was composing his answer, but because he was deciding whether the disagreement was worth the energy of saying aloud. She noticed that he remembered the names of everyone in every room, down to the building staff, and used them. She noticed that he drank his coffee black and didn't like it, but drank it that way anyway, as if sweetness in that form was something he had decided he didn't have time for. She also noticed that he was one of the only people in his orbit who looked at her directly when she spoke. Not through her, not past her, at her. It was more disorienting than she had expected. 6 weeks in, there was a second crisis. Not a gun-on-the-table crisis, but the kind that builds slowly and then arrives all at once. A deal with a French consortium that had seemed stable started to fracture over a clause that had been ambiguously worded in the original agreement, ambiguously in English, clearly in the French version, and the difference between what the two sides understood themselves to have agreed to was significant enough to threaten the whole structure. Meredith found the discrepancy at 11:30 at night, while reviewing documents for a call scheduled for the following morning. She was sitting at her kitchen table in sweatpants with a cup of tea going cold beside her laptop, and she read the French version and then the English version and then the French version again, and her stomach turned over. She called Whitfield. Whitfield connected her to Hale. He answered on the second ring. His voice was the same at 11:30 at night as it was in a room full of European bankers. She found that oddly reassuring. She explained what she had found. She walked him through both versions of the clause, the specific divergence and the downstream implications. He listened without interrupting, which she had noticed was one of his actual skills, rather than merely a courtesy. When she finished, he was quiet for 4 seconds. She counted. "When did you find this?" he said. 20 minutes ago, she said, "and you called immediately." "Of course," she said. "What else would I do?" Another silence, shorter. Most people would have waited until morning and seen if it resolved itself. "It wouldn't have resolved itself," she said. "It would have gotten worse. Problems don't resolve themselves." "No," he said. "They don't." A pause. "I'll have Whitfield call you with the call-in number for an emergency session tonight. Can you be ready in an hour?" She looked at her sweatpants. "Give me 40 minutes." She heard the very edge of something in his voice. If she had been pressed to name it, she would have said, warmth. 40 minutes, he said. The French deal closed 3 days later. The amended clause was, if anything, more favorable to both sides than the original, because the process of re-examining it had surfaced 2 other points of ambiguity that were also resolved. In the hallway outside the conference room, after the signatures, Desmond Hale stopped beside her. He did not look like a man who often stopped for things. He looked like a man in motion who had chosen to briefly pause. She thought that was probably true in most situations. "You saved that deal," he said. "I found a discrepancy," she said. "You structured the solution. I structured it because you gave me 12 hours instead of 12 minutes. He looked at her. "That's not a small thing, Meredith." It was the first time he had used her first name. She noted it. She filed it. "I was just doing my job," she said. "Yes," he said. "That's what makes it notable." He held her gaze for a moment. She had gotten better at holding his gaze back without looking away or looking down, which had taken practice. He was the kind of person whose direct attention felt like pressure, not because he intended it that way, but because he was entirely present when he looked at something, and that presence had weight. Then he said, "I'd like to offer you a permanent position." She thought about the library, the broken printer on the second floor, the patron who called her by her first name. "Define permanent," she said. The edge of his mouth moved. She had started cataloguing these the way she catalogued dialects. The almost smile, the quarter smile, the full smile she had still never seen, the thing that happened to his jaw when he was suppressing amusement. This one was an almost smile. "Full-time," he said. "Senior language and package will reflect the title. I want to keep the library job," she said. He looked at her. "Mornings," she said. "I'll come in by noon. I need the library." "Why?" he said, not challenging. Genuinely asking. "Because it keeps me grounded," she said, "because the people there need help and I can give it, and it costs me nothing except time. Because languages exist to connect people, not just to close deals, and I need to remember that." He was quiet for a moment. "Mornings," he said finally. "Mornings," she agreed. He held out his hand. She shook it. His grip was exactly what she would have predicted. Firm, undemonstrative, businesslike. What she hadn't predicted was that he held on for exactly 1 beat longer than a handshake requires, and that when he let go, he didn't immediately look away. She took a breath. She looked away first. "I'll see you Monday," she said. "Monday," he said. On the way down in the elevator, Meredith Holloway leaned her back against the mirrored wall and looked at the ceiling and thought about the night 3 months ago when a door latch had the wrong room with her cleaning cart, and she had walked into the wronging cart, and a bottle of spray solution in her apron pocket, and a gun had been lying on a table, and 14 men had looked at her like she was a problem that needed to be managed. She thought about her mother and the thing about tools. She thought about the specific quality of attention that came from being seen after years of being looked through by someone who didn't miss things. She thought about Monday. The elevator doors opened on the lobby. She walked out into the Chicago evening, early November, the air sharp with the coming cold, the lake wind finding every gap in her coat, and turned up her collar and headed for the train. She had a shift at the library in the morning. The printer on the 2nd floor was still broken. There was a woman who came in every Friday to use the genealogy database, who had been trying for 2 years to trace a branch of her family back to Bohemia, and hadn't been able to get past 1887, and Meredith had spent her last free hour looking up German parish records from that region, and thought she might have finally found a thread worth pulling. She had that to do first. Then Monday,